My name is Paul Grodd, and I'm the moderator today. I'm the president and CEO of Rodan Energy. We're a smart grid integrator in the North American marketplace, and work with a lot of these companies and technologies in the North American power market, including my colleague here, Eric Murray, who's with Temporal Power. Let me quickly introduce the panel here. We're starting off with the first speaker. It will be Minister Ostap Semerak. Minister Semerak is the Minister of Ecology and Natural Resources for Ukraine. Yulia Kovalyou is the First Deputy Minister for Economic Development and Trade in Ukraine. Mr. Serhiy Oleksienko is Plenipotentiary for Prospective Projects for Naftogaz Ukraine. Boris Belan is the Vice President for Northland Power. James Larson is the Director of Business Development of the Mars Advanced Energy Center. And Eric Murray is the Co-President and Chief Executive Officer of Temporal Power. And we have a guest from the United States. We have the Honorable Richard Morningstar, who's the Founding Director of the Global Energy Center for the Atlantic Council. Welcome. Please join me in welcoming our distinguished panelists. Let me first call up to make a few brief remarks, Minister Ostap Semerak.
Thank you very much. That's a surprise for Minister of Ecology and Natural Resources to be on a panel on energy, but I would like to start that Ukraine longs for development, and development itself is a positive change. And investment in one of the key in the key priority is important for our positive change. And I would like to say that my priority is to make Ukrainian economy more green and more sustainable, and that is important to talk about those perspectives that we are proposing in exclusion zone. And today my colleagues are going to tell more about aspects of investing in the energy sector of Ukraine and renewable energy in particular. And let's start our talk. Doesn't work, sorry. Oh, yeah. Today I would like to present to you completely unique investment facility. Our target is to give new impetus to the exclusive zone, to move away from the tragic image and to go to development. And our goal is to turn the minus into plus. Yeah, to spare a little bit time, I want to say that exclusive zone has a lot of different sides, and I would like to stress your attention on Chernobyl exclusive zone as a territory of renewable energy. The need to increase part of renewable energy is a total energy balance of Ukraine is our goal, not only by global trends and economic effectiveness, but above all by energy and national security of Ukraine. After the commissioning of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, much of electric grid management station is still operational, and even today it provides regional energy overflows and distribution. Facilities of Chernobyl nuclear power station and the surrounding area may allow to place objects of solar generation, as well as the facilities of generating heat and power from biomass and fuel. Available land within the exclusion zone allowed to grow energy crops without their removal from the exclusive zone. Solar energy deserves careful attention in terms of the installed capacity and project flexibility. According to the German Institute Fraunhofer, that is the data from their research, says that Ukraine has a great potential for development of the solar energy generation, and this picture will show you that the best place for solar energy plants in Germany is worse than the worst one in Ukraine. A number of additional factors indicated on the slide will have a beneficial effect on the implementation of our plans to attract investments in the exclusive zone. What is important, we can export all electricity on west, on east, on north, or on south, and after the January of 2016, Ukraine has Ukraine has DCFTA with the European Union, and that is really a great benefit for investing in this project. And today, representatives of EBRD already told that they are interested in discussion on supporting such a project in Ukraine, and that is good as well for the future of this project. Sorry to be a little bit shorter than I planned, but Pavlo told me that we have no time to talk. And finally, I want to give more information a little bit about our state company that is here, and it's Nadra Ukraine. Two guys on the last bench, and they have some propositions in mining gas and oil in Ukraine. They have these materials with them. Please contact with those two representatives to discuss the future of such investments in Ukraine. Thank you.
And now I'd like to call up our second speaker. I'd like to call up Ms. Yulia Kovaliu, who is the First Deputy Minister for Economic Development and Trade, Ukraine.
Hello, everybody, and it's an honor for me to be here. It's as already today mentioned a lot of times, it's one of the biggest business forum of Ukraine and Canada for the last 25 years. And I would like to say shortly about the changes in overall energy sector in Ukraine, which are remarkable and which are really those results of reform that can be tangible and seen not only in Ukraine but the worldwide. Ukraine energy sector is the ground of development of all the industries within the country. You can have a technology, you can have an asset, you can have even highly qualified people, but unless you can switch on the light, you can't operate the business. So the energy sector for 20 years in Ukraine was the source of big money. It was the source of growing tycoons or oligarchs, as we call them, corruption and inefficiency. Moreover, I would like to move on with the slides. If you look in Ukraine and our economy, we are consuming, 3 times more energy per $1 of GDP in our country as Germany and other development countries do. And moreover, the energy supply was a point of political influence in our country, putting the 45 million country developed on its east neighbor, which cost us now hundreds of lives on the east and the part of our sovereign territory. That's why the energy sector reform is not only the matter of investment opportunities in our country, but it's a matter of sovereign security of our country and a showcase and a proof of our strict commitment to fight corruption and to introduce European rules and legislation of operating business in this market. I would like, just to be very quick, to show you some highlights of the achievements of the energy reform, which we've done really only for 2 last years. First of all, we introduced a total European regulation of the gas market, which started affecting from the 1st of October of last year, and which guarantees the full liberalization and the free access for all market players to the market. We decreased the royalty payment from around 50% to 29%, and stimulating the increase of the upstream sector. Since November 2015, we don't buy any gas from Russia, and all the gas flow we import is the European gas, coming from the market prices without any intermediary parties directly to our country. More than 15 private companies are now importing gas in Ukraine. So we really made a huge progress on diversification of gas flow. We fully liberalized gas tariffs starting from 1st of May of this year. And honestly speaking, it's one of the toughest reforms in our country because we really increased those tariffs from 3 to 5 times. And it's a big challenge for us, it's a big challenge for our country, but we introduced a very generous subsidy program which touches those who really need and do not subsidize those who don't need a reach. And Naftogaz, which was previously one of the darkest corners in Ukrainian economy and bottomed consuming our budget money. For example, in 2014, we donated Naftogaz for around 100,000 million of US hryvnias. First in their history from 2016 will be a profitable company and will invest much in the upstream. We established the supervisory board, and Naftogaz is now a flagship project in the country in terms of the corporate governance reform of the state-owned enterprises. But it's not the end. Our ambitious plan for the next 3 or 5 years is to become a self-independent country in terms of energy resources. Are we dreamers, you can ask? No, we are doers. By increasing gas prices, we are planning to invest much in our upstream sector to increase the total gas which will be produced in Ukraine for around 30 billion of cubic meters per year. Energy efficiency is now not someone news in the Western media, it's a must in our country because you can't introduce any motivation for energy efficiency unless you pay a transparent and full market recovery price. Otherwise, it's a waste of money putting in the energy efficiency. And we estimate this market to be around 35 billion of US dollars, investing in insulation of the houses, public buildings, changing the equipment, and modernizing utility sector. It's one of the hugest markets we just established by reforming the energy sector. But in order to succeed in this, we need the technology and we need the private capital to help us as the country to succeed in this reform. So we welcome you to invest in our gas sector. But I will move forward with the electricity market. It's also now under the big reform because we are transferring our electricity market from the wholesale model to the to the competitive model where everybody can choose the supplier, where the producers are competing for each other. And we're also investing with the help of our IFIs, with the help of international banks. We are much investing in our infrastructure to meet the demand of the business growing in Ukraine. And we are also diversifying another issue of our energy resources is the nuclear power, and we are getting now we are not only dependent on Russia on the nuclear fuels, but we made a few projects with the American Westinghouse companies in terms of diversification of nuclear fuels. And we also are very eager to get the best international investors in line in privatization of one of the biggest thermal power plant in Ukraine, Centrenergo. And today, my colleague Igor Belarus already mentioned it. Why we need it? It's because of competition. It's about bringing to Ukraine a better Western rules of doing business. It's about the culture of doing business. It's about the competition with all those Ukrainian companies we already have the market. And we need here the investment. We need their good corporate governance. We need an example how to do the real competitive business in Ukraine. Moving to renewables, my colleague Ostap Semarakon already mentioned our ambitious plan. For the 2020, we put a goal for ourselves as around 11% of overall energy mixture to come from renewable energy. We now are very strong in hydro energy, but we still have a big potential of developing our renewables, solar, wind, biomass, and biogas. We are the country who is one of the top 3 countries exporting agri-goods, agri-commodity, and still we have a lot of agri-waste, and which is the real source of developing biomass and biogas renewables. And honestly speaking, we are one of the most favorable in terms of green tariffs throughout Europe. And we introduced a lot of other incentives for those companies who are coming to the renewable sector in Ukraine. And we believe this sector will boost in the future 3-5 years. And last but not the least, is the energy efficiency. And it's one of the now key points of energy independence of our country. By introducing the market gas prices, we already see the results. For the last winter, heating season of the year, the total consumption of households of gas in our country dropped down to 20%, and it's not our aim. We estimate in the government the overall energy efficiency market of 35 billion of euros, and it's a great opportunity. It's a great opportunity for cooperation, for the development, and for the innovation, because we see our young interpreters inside the country also developing some innovation products in terms of energy saving and in terms of cutting off the bills of consumers at the end of the story, because you cut the bill either without prices or without amount of energy you produce. And that's why from the government we also established some few programs to support the energy efficiency initiatives. Together with our European partners, we already launched a big fund, energy efficiency fund, which will finance this project in terms of energy efficiency, covering part of the interest rate, covering part of the loan bill for those household and residential sector who really need it. So that's why, that is the case. What today we were saying about the investment, about how reforms influence the investment promotion. And I would say that this is really the case when starting the reform in one sector. We developed totally new sectors for us, like energy efficiency, like diversification, like developing the upstream sector. But it's not the end. I would say these, if you will ask me about my own estimation of our energy reform, our glass is half of not empty, but half of the full, but we need a lot of steps to move forward to do it. And that's why, in order to succeed, I will repeat myself, we need the support of technology, we need the support of good business, and we need the private capital to help the state to invest and to develop our energy sector. Thanks.
Thank you. Our next panelist is Mr. Serhiy Oleksienko, who is the plenipotentiary for prospective projects for Naftogaz Ukraine.
Ukraine is a remarkable country in terms of energy and gas, but at the same time, you cannot find a country where energy was misused, misappropriated at such a big scale for such a long period of time. The sector, since independence, didn't have any practical strategy except for making few in the power more enriched by misappropriating the public funds. And at the same time, and it's very important within this forum, is a recognition that within only 2 years since recent revolution, the sector experienced so much improvements and so much updates in terms of efficiency that this is a level of change you can achieve in Ukraine in the current times with the persistence, with a clear view, and with the support from various stakeholders in the government. Naftogaz was mentioned many times during today because it is a flagship of reform, but this reform is not achieved only within the company. It is achieved with the support of the government, of the international funding institutions, etc. Our key achievements over the last couple of years is the diversification of supply, its operation efficiency, and structural reforms the way how Naftogaz operates. Ukraine introduced a substantial market reforms in terms of legislation. Now, Ukrainian energy market is more transparent and more open than few other Central and Eastern European compared markets. We have fewer exclusions from the blueprint of the European Union on the market access by foreign participants and how tariffs and other things are regulated in Ukraine than few of our neighbors which are part of the community for much a longer period of time. We've introduced new gas market law. We are signing new interconnector agreements with our neighboring countries to allow a freer flow of gas to Ukraine and out of Ukraine. We are introducing efficient secondary legislation. We are introducing new tariffs on the transportation of gas and tariffs for final consumers. These are major achievements which cannot be exaggerated. But a true turnaround in Ukraine, which no other country achieved so far, is a very rapid refocus from source of supply of the energy. Now Ukraine can, few years ago, Ukraine was 95% dependent on supply of gas from Russia. Now we have interconnectors in place which allow a competitive supply of gas from EU to 100% of our annual supply needs. Now we are buying from Russia gas only when it is price and commercial terms competitive to other sources. Naftogaz achieved a major success in improving operational efficiency of the company. We are recovering debts, we are improving payment collections, we are improving the way how we iterate with the independent market participants. We improve the way how Naftogaz procures and delivers services to our customers. The corporate governance reform was mentioned several times during the year and during this forum, but this reform should not be underestimated. It's a true paradigm shift in the way how government-owned enterprises are operated and will be operated in the future. From a direct guiding of the line ministries, Naftogaz will be operating now as a commercially motivated and commercially operated entity. Independent supervisory board, which is majority completed by foreign nationals, will be operating independently on overseeing many control and executive functions in the company. Naftogaz is now more transparent, and if you want a brief history of the gas sector in Ukraine, look at our annual report. I'll skip few slides and want to focus on 3 important investment opportunities in Ukraine. Ukraine is one of the top gas reserves country in Europe. We are operating one of the largest transmission system in Europe, and we are operating one of the largest underground gas storage system in Europe. For many, many years, energy sector was practically closed for the interest from any foreign investors. This is no longer the case. Laws, bylaws, and first of all, the will of the government is to increase foreign investors' participation in the energy sector. Ukraine has many advantages compared to our neighbors, which will eventually attract foreign investments into the sector. It's huge untapped reserves. It's already scalable production. It's a relatively low cost base compared to our neighbors. This will all allow a substantial increase in the domestic gas production within the short period of time. And this increase in the domestic gas production is comparable in scale to the increase which Azerbaijan is delivering to the European market now. So Ukraine is now a source of the second major energy discoveries for the region. Ukrainian government is introduced several other important initiatives, which is to establish JVs for the operation of gas transmission system operator and underground gas storages. These initiatives are only recent, but they are absolutely immense in terms of scale and opportunity. There are several Canadian companies with the access to the stock market which are already successfully operating in Ukraine, but we are welcoming more of these companies to enter Ukraine. Now it's the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Sidhi. We're going to do a quick, just a quick switch on the order. We're going to actually have James Larson come up next. So James is the Director of Business Development for the Mars Advanced Energy Center. Please, James.
Nice, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, and I have to preemptively apologize. I'm not actually going to be able to participate in much of the panel, but I'll try and spin through what I have to say very quickly. Or do I have the slides?
Yeah, they're working on it.
Oh.
Maybe just get started.
Sure. So I work at Mars, at the Advanced Energy Center. So Mars is a nonprofit startup incubator and innovation hub located here in Toronto. And so we support startups in a few different ways. The first can be thought of sort of as the supply of innovation, which is, how do we actually help entrepreneurs themselves? And secondly, how do we support them grow their business? And actually, Eric Murray is actually the CEO, president of one of our client ventures here. But the second is where I work, and it's called systems change. And so the work that we do is we look at 3 different change vectors, and specifically with the energy sector. Those are the policies that are in place, the actual solutions that are come to bear, and lastly, the market capacity to absorb. And it's our thesis, and we would submit that any solution, any project, any development, and any investment that my fellow panelists have been speaking about should be looked at through these 3 lenses. And so we work with a lot of different governments around the world and a lot of different markets. And so it's exciting to be here to speak about Ukraine and the potential of that market. I'm going to keep this really brief because I'm going to try and get us to move to the panel. But the Canadian market, I'm actually going to speak about Canadian opportunities for Ukrainian companies, because I think our other colleagues here have talked quite eloquently about the opportunities in Ukraine. So I just want to talk about a few of the trends that we're seeing in Canada. The first thing is that our rates are actually quite high, and moreover than them just being high, they're also rising, and so there's an incentive for customers really to look at alternative options. And so what I'm referring to is the options for distributed energy resources like solar, wind, community solar, energy storage, like Eric's company. So we're seeing a huge trend in that regard. The second thing is that the reliability of the grid hasn't actually been improving much over time. And so the confluence of those two things together yet again increases the impetus for people to look at alternative options. And we're seeing a large opportunity here for our Canadian companies as well as other foreign companies that are looking at this market. Moreover, the cost of alternatives are actually decreasing, and so when we hear this concept of grid parity, which is the concept of rising electricity prices and falling distributed energy resource costs, you can see that eventually those lines will meet. And it's obviously different in every jurisdiction, but in Canada, there's a lot of discussion around this because in certain markets we could be quite near. And so once again, just pointing towards the impetus of these new types of clean, renewable sources of energy are increasingly important. Moreover, in terms of storage itself, storage is anticipated to increase by about a 45% CAGR over the next 10 years. So incredible opportunity there in storage. Electrical vehicles. Forecasted at a CAGR of about 30% over the next 10 years. So again, a huge impetus there. And the Internet of Things. We've hear a lot of talk about home energy management systems and other behind the meter services. But these types of technologies are starting to really catch fire locally here in Ontario as well as the rest of Canada. So for companies in that space, there's certainly a lot of opportunity as well. And lastly, when you look at Canada's energy consumption compared to the world, this is the one I think I find the most staggering. We're more than double the next highest region, which is the Pacific region. And then in the Middle East, closely following that, also about half. And so really what that insinuates is that there's a strong need for energy conservation. The fact that Canada consumes so much energy shows that there's a great opportunity there, both in terms of the residential and commercial. This opportunity spans both those regards. So it's a quick overview, and I apologize for being so quick, but I'm just trying to move things along. So I look forward to the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric. And especially, Eric, thank you for doing that without actually any slides on the screen. So we were able to visualize. Our next presenter is Boris Balan. He's the Vice President for Northland Power, who's had experience both in Ukraine and in Europe in the energy sector. Boris.
Very brief introduction, just to put some context here. Northland Power is an independent power producer based here in Canada. We've got a long history of over 30 years of developing power projects, which means designing putting the idea together, financing it, constructing it, owning it, and operating it for a very long period of time. That's just a drawing or a map showing our geography, where we're located. The important thing, I think, also in all of that is to show that we're involved in a number of technologies, natural gas-fired projects, including combined heat and power. I heard the representative of the State Property Fund talk about that as an important priority for Ukraine. It's something that we certainly have experience in. But also the whole renewable sector of wind power. We did wind power projects in Canada. We've done several. Solar power in Canada, and increasingly, and even more so now, offshore wind projects in Europe, which has brought us to a large presence in Europe. And we have two very large projects under development in Europe. under construction. The point of the slide is just to tell you that we have a lot of experience in the whole area of financing and developing and building power projects, and I think it's something that might be of significance and importance for Ukraine. Just right now, for example, we have this under construction as we speak, 2 very large offshore wind projects in Europe with a total value of about 4 billion euros, and also several in Canada. Actually, one has since been completed, but several recently under construction and completing in Canada. The important thing, though, is that, you know, it's a lot of activity, it's a lot of investment, but it's not only our investment. The real key, I think, in all these energy projects is to structure them and to develop in such a way that you can get good project financing or attract other cheaper sources of capital to bring down the overall cost of these projects. So the important thing is that this is 4 billion euros and several $100 million of activity. It's not all of our equity. It is also a very large percentage of that is coming from financial institutions who are lending money to the projects. Now, why is that possible? Large power projects, like the ones we're talking about, really lend themselves to long-term financing. They are assets that will live and produce power for a very long period of time, 10, 20, 30, 40 years. They are very capital intensive. They require a lot of equity and a lot of financing, but because of that, they're also very attractive to lenders who are looking for an opportunity to lend money to projects where they can put money into a financing and get a return over a long period of time. Again, built on the back of the long-lived asset that we're talking about. The important thing is that the most efficient, or one of the most important ways to overall lower the cost of these projects is to do a very effective financing, to attract as much debt as possible at the most favorable rates, and you have to structure a project to really make that work. The most important fundamental in many ways is the revenue of a project. When you build a project, how are you going to earn revenue from it? How consistent is that revenue going to be? How predictable? How certain is it? It's very important to get that straight. And when we come in our company to talk about opportunities that we're looking to invest in, virtually the first question is always revolving around what is the revenue story? How do you get paid for the power that we are going to produce, so we know we can, on the back of that, develop the project, finance it, and do it in the most economical way, and at the end also profitable for our company and for everyone else involved. When you talk about renewable energies, there's another very important factor that comes into that, and that is because renewable energy technology, by and large, in and of itself, is a more expensive form of technology. We do it for a variety of reasons. We do it for environmental reasons. We do it for ecological reasons. We do it for obligations that we have in the world community in terms of greenhouse gas emissions and things like that. We do it to free ourselves of long-term dependence on fuel sources. You know, renewable sources are the sun, the wind are free fuel sources. You're not dependent on other parties to provide them. So they're very good for all those reasons, but they are a little bit more expensive in general, and you have to take that into account. I stole this slide from a session that I was at last couple weeks ago, where a commercial bank, the head of the risk department of the commercial bank, was talking about renewable energy financing from the commercial bank's point of view. And I've said the commercial banks are a very important player in the whole process to make the project economical and affordable. And they said the most important thing when you're talking renewable things is regulatory risk. Technology we all understand. Wind power is understood. Solar power is understood. There's not a lot of great difficulties in that. But what's important in renewable energies really is a regulatory risk. You know that you're going to get a lot of your revenue as a result of some sort of a subsidy regime. The reality is that power produced, and here's the examples from the United Kingdom, for example, where wholesale power on the power markets, you can buy it at 45 pounds or 35 pounds, roughly. To make an efficient renewable project, you need about 100 pounds or more. It's going down very dramatically, but it's still higher than a wholesale price, and that's the reality across all sorts of jurisdictions. That revenue subsidy has to come from somewhere, and inevitably, it's coming from the government in one form or another. So the banks ask themselves, can we trust that revenue source? Can we trust that the government is going to live up to its commitment, and that we're actually going to see that revenue for the 20 or 30 years or 20 years that we might be lending money to this project for? It's a very long time. It's a very big question to them. Well, they can't always be sure, but they have to do their risk analysis, and they look at all the issues. So here are some of the things, the check mark of things that they're looking at. Obviously, this is a challenge for many places. I heard today, and I was very encouraged to hear about a stated government policy of an 11% target for renewable energy. Those are important things for a political system, for a country to state as policy and as intent. But there's also a very important thing that lies behind all that. There's a legislative process and there's legislation that leads to these things. So the question that the banks are asking, is there a record of stable legislation to support these tariffs? So if the government announces there's going to be a subsidy tariff for a 15 or 20-year period for solar power, and they announce a price, and I think we've even seen the Ukrainian context, if for wind price, they're talking about 10 euro cents a kilowatt hour, which is an attractive rate, probably. You could probably do a good project on that. But the question will always rise in everybody's mind is, how do I know that for the 10 or 15 or 20 years that I'm financing this project, that money's really going to come to me? So the banks are going to look at these kinds of questions. They want to see answers, and I think these are all legitimate questions that everyone should be asking themselves. How is a subsidy calculated? How is it going to be paid? Is it a transparent system? Is it there? In the middle of that, is there a track record of stable legislation with no retroactive changes to tariffs? So what are the challenges? I think if you look at that sort of list, what are the challenges to Ukraine and to a country like Ukraine? I think you have to try to address as many of those issues that you can and to sort of give a good, clear answer. And you see many of them coming out, and I think it's very encouraging. But you have to be very open and honest about all those things. If there's going to be a predictable subsidy regime, it's got to be clear and transparent. The biggest issue, again, in the middle of that list, I think in some ways, and it's addressed really to our colleagues and the representatives of the Ukrainian authorities, the Ukrainian parliament, the Ukrainian government, is this issue of legislative certainty. It's a crucially important thing, and it's not something, I don't think anyone should take it as any kind of personal affront. Investors had an experience recently in Spain. Spain had a very large and attractive tariff to encourage renewable energies. And when they ran into serious financial troubles, they simply changed the law. And the law that was there to give these tariffs is just as easily a law that's taken away. And I think as investors are going to be very concerned about that kind of thing, and they have to really get comfort that the Ukrainian government is going to do everything in its power to make sure that those kinds of things don't happen to them. So in that respect, one simple solution is, these are not easy solutions, but one comment might be that legislative tariffs are very good, but beyond that, there's sort of contract law, which is it's a very powerful tool, especially contract law, where the parties are subject to a third-party arbitration and third-party review, so that if there is a retroactive change in government policy, and it's reflected by a new change in the legislation, the investors have recourse through third parties, independent of the Ukrainian government itself, for an arbitration and for some sort of hearing to make sure that they are getting still whatever the best deal they possibly can get. That, I think, is a very simple, too simplified, probably known to many people here story, but I think it's important to consider that as the most important factor to go forward. And just if you'll indulge me for just one more minute on you cannot have it one more minute. You can't have a little talk without some sort of a humorous statement. And I just wanted to welcome all the Ukrainian guests here today. This room, if you didn't notice, is named after a very famous Canadian writer named Pierre Berton, who wrote many, many important books about Canadian history, who really defined many things about Canadians themselves. And one of his most famous sayings, one of his most famous quotes is that what really defines a Canadian is someone who can make love in a canoe. While you've got that image in your mind, you think of the challenges of your energy sector, I think they pale in comparison. I think that everybody is up to the task to do better than that, and I think the Ukrainians are as well. So good luck and thank you.
No worries. Thanks, Boris. You've left us with a very vivid image for this afternoon. Hopefully we'll drown that away at cocktail hour, which, speaking of which, is starting shortly. So I'd ask the following speakers to be brief because you're the only one standing between this lovely crowd and cocktails. No pressure, Eric, but let me introduce Eric Murray, who is the co-president and chief executive officer of Temporal Power.
Okay. Well, I've got my marching orders, so I will be quick. Good on the slides? So I come at this a little bit differently. We're a relatively new technology, and the technology we make are, wow, I'm going to be really quick. I'm getting hints from both sides. Well, what you see on the right-hand side there is a flywheel, and flywheels are a kinetic energy storage medium. So historically, utilities solved network stability problems with brute force, more generation. And the problem is most generation consumes fuel of some sort. What our technology does is it delivers grid stability and allows utilities to take on more renewable energy while maintaining grid stability, okay? No, absolutely not. Thank you for asking, though. No drinks for you. I won't go through too many of the. Oh man, that's bad.
Must be your patent lawyers that had it at.
Exactly. So really, there are a number of different ways that you can apply this technology, and it's similar to many of the storage technologies out there in that it is a new capital installation, right? So you're competing against installed capacity. Invariably, that means you're competing against a variable cost of usually fuel only. So to drive to a more fuel efficient or a more effective way of generating and using energy, sometimes you have to make the tough decision on spending capital versus just OpEx. And that reflects well on Boris's comments about having stable regulation so you can make a clear commitment to the marketplace and people can make long-term decisions to help you drive a change in the grid. This is a picture that shows on the left-hand side the usually what a grid looks like. Invariably, the generation side is quite stable. The consumption side is very dynamic as people turn things on and off in an uncoordinated fashion. The challenge here is we all expect to have very stable power to come in and power our homes, using our TVs and our computers and other sensitive loads. And if you don't have a way of stabilizing your grid, you really tend to run into problems. And so, as I said, how historically that was solved is with what's called a suite of ancillary services, usually delivered by generation. Storage is a great way to consume and inject energy very rapidly onto the grid to stabilize the grid. And in our case, what that means is no fuel consumption, very fast response, and a different way of using the generation resources that you've got. This is a similar illustration for renewable energy, which as you add more and more renewable energy to your grid, you tend to have cyclic nature of your generation input as well as your demand. So it makes for a less stable grid than you'd otherwise have. And so as you take on more renewable energy, one of the things that we're finding here in Ontario, but also in other locations, is maintaining the stability of the grid's really important. And if you don't plan ahead, you tend to have to do that with conventional fossil generation, which defeats the whole purpose of bringing renewable energy on in the first place. Okay? So these are some pictures of facilities and how they're put together. They tend to cycle quite a lot. This is a facility in Minto, Ontario. By way of illustration, it went through a full depth of discharger for a full cycle from completely full to completely empty, a little over 5,200 times last year. And a battery just can't do that and last. For those of you that ever have owned a car in a place like Edmonton and tried to start it multiple times in the winter, you kill your battery. So bottom line is, when you have dynamic networks, you need to use different technologies for different things. Stability is really where we, okay, I give up. Stability is really where we shine. So what I'd wrapped up with was in looking at frequency or any sort of flywheel energy storage application, there are a number of opportunities. There's the opportunity to look at stabilizing the Ukrainian grid, using the existing fossil fuel sources more effectively. and dealing with some of the transmission challenges that are unique to Ukraine, where generation's sort of on one side and the majority of your loads on the other side of the country. What we see as an opportunity is, as we expand outside of Canada, we see renewable adoption being a pretty universal opportunity. It's being driven first in smaller grids, the Caribbean, northern communities, places where they rely very heavily on fossil fuel, but ultimately we're seeing benefits as well in networks like Ontario. And finding people that understand the grid, understand how to make a complex grid work is something that we're looking to partner with in Europe and in Asia as well. So I'll leave my remarks there.
Great. Thanks, Eric. Now, our final speaker is somebody who I've had the privilege of being on panels with before. Actually, the last panel I think that Dick and I were on was in Wrocław, Poland, at the Wrocław Global Forum the Atlantic Council put on last year. It's no better person to wrap up the session. Dick is a prolific speaker and writer on energy issues, in particular in global energy issues, but with a specific expertise in Eastern Europe. So please join me in welcoming the Honorable Richard Morningstar, the founding director of the Global Energy Center at the Atlantic Council.
Thanks very much, Paul. I will be very brief. I know everybody wants to go and get a drink. I assume we're not going to have much time, if any, for discussion at this point. Let me start off by, first, I couldn't be happier to be here. I love to talk about Ukraine energy issues. I started working on these issues back at the beginning of the Clinton administration in 1993 and have spent a lot of time in Ukraine over the years. I think there are 5 main points to take from the discussion, and then I'll maybe fill it in just a little bit and keep to the 5 minutes. One, Ukraine has made real progress in the energy sector over the last couple of years, and it's had a measurable impact. But as the Deputy Minister said, the glass is half full, and there's still a lot to be done. There are significant reasons to invest in Ukraine's energy sector, but the elephant in the room are questions relating to rule of law, contract enforcement, corruption. These issues must be faced and are to an extent being faced. And the 5th point, there is a real role, I think, for politically active communities, whether it be the Ukrainian-Canadian community or the Ukrainian-American community. And I'm a member of the Ukrainian-American community. My grandmother's from Ukraine. And I think it's critical that these communities just keep pushing for the necessary changes that have to take place, continue to take place in Ukraine. As far as the real progress in the energy sector, I think it is unbelievable that it is 205 days, literally to the day, since Ukraine last purchased gas directly from Russia. When I started going back to Ukraine in 2009, when I was Hillary Clinton's special envoy on energy, Ukraine was purchasing 35 BCM, billion cubic meters a year, of gas from Russia. And now none right now is coming directly from Russia. A very good job has been being done in installing gas meters for household and industrial consumption, as well as in the heating sector. A lot more needs to be done. The gas price increase was absolutely critical, and there have been gas price increases in the past, but the politics of Ukraine caused them to disappear after a period of time. They must stay in place. And the result of that increase, together with a subsidy system that seems to be working pretty well, has been approximately a 25% decrease in consumption of energy. Now, part of that's because of what's happened in the Donbass and with the economy in Ukraine, but a good part of it, most of it, I would argue, is a result of just reducing the use of energy. there's still work that needs to be done. There must be an independent regulator once and for all in the energy sector in Ukraine. And if Ukraine is ever going to accomplish anything, particularly in complicated areas in renewables like Mr. Balan and Mr. Murray were talking about, it can't be done without an independent regulatory authority that understands how that understands how to do it. So that's absolutely critical. The unbundling of Naftagaz is critical. And that I realize that may be impossible until the arbitration between Naftagaz and the Russians and Gazprom that's taking place in Stockholm now is over, maybe in the spring of next year. But it really needs to be done as soon as possible. And obviously continued work on efficiency. Now, the reasons why should investors take a chance in Ukraine? My colleague at the Atlantic Council, Anders Osland, who has written huge amounts about Ukraine over the years, gave 10 reasons to invest in Ukraine. I won't go through all those 10 reasons, but you can look it up, his article on the Atlantic Council website, but they are good reasons. But that still raises the overwhelming hurdle of rule of law, contract enforcement, and corruption. Now, there's not all bad news. Constitutional amendments were passed by the Rada, which will reform the court system. It needs to be implemented, and it needs to be implemented as soon as possible. I think Mr. Balan was right when he said that right now, if you're going to go to Ukraine and you want to take the chance that you'll be legally protected, you better have arbitration provisions in the contracts that you have for arbitration, probably in third countries, but hopefully that problem will be mitigated, I hope, very soon. And on the corruption side, there's a lot of talk about dealing with corruption, and there does seem to be maybe a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, but we'll know that there's light at the end of the tunnel when there are several high-level corrupt figures that are actually being prosecuted. So that I come back to the point that it's critical for the diaspora to take a very active role, whether it's urging the full unbundling of Naftagaz, increasing domestic gas production, which was mentioned earlier, where I think there are huge possibilities there, continuing to increase energy efficiency. I won't get into any more specifics on that, and enforcing the rule of law and tackling corruption. I'll make one last point, and I think I'm actually under 5 minutes, or pretty close anyway. I really hate Nord Stream 2. I have been speaking out continually about problems relating to Nord Stream 2. I don't know whether it's going to happen. I have an article coming out. It'll either be on the Atlantic Council website or in some other publication that I've done actually with Anders. Anders Osland will come out in the next day or two, one way or another. People aren't thinking about, people talk about the third energy package and the problems with that and all the political issues, of which there are many. How can you reward Gazprom after what they've done in Ukraine? And obviously it would affect the transit fees. But nobody should forget the competition case that the Commission is conducting against Gazprom right now. And how in the world can the EU ever allow Nord Stream 2 to take place while that competition case, which is accusing Gazprom of abusing its dominant position, while that's still outstanding and hasn't been resolved, how can it even be considered? Because all Nord Stream 2 will do will increase Gazprom's chance to abuse its dominant position. So with that, go have some drinks.
Thank you, Dick. I think we'll take about 3 questions. And while we're preparing the mics, just if people could raise their hands so we could pass the mics around. I just wanted to make just a closing remark because I'm listening to the panel, and one of the areas that we haven't really talked about are opportunities for Ukrainian companies in Canada. And as a company who does work in North America as an energy services company, we see all the opportunities, especially with the greening of our grid. Also, especially with new carbon taxes and a pressure on cleaner emitting fuel technologies. I think there's a great opportunity here. And I met some great Ukrainian companies today on different areas, very efficient inverters, other kinds of control technologies. And I encourage and I welcome the Ukrainian companies to look at the North American marketplace, especially with the signing of the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement, because don't forget, we also have a free trade agreement with the United States and Mexico. So Canada could be a really great partner for Ukrainian technologies and Ukrainian companies to do business in Canada and also in the North American marketplace. So please consider that as well. Let me ask for the first question. There's a question in the back here, and then one right here in the front. If you could just introduce yourself, and if you can just keep it to a question, please, no comments.
Hi. My name is Mike Kobalecki. I'm an engineer, but I don't work in the energy field. And I trust all the speakers and with their comments. So let me ask a question as a consumer. I think one of the stats I saw was that Ukraine had to go to market rates, and it looked like the consumer is paying 4 times what he used to pay. Now, as a consumer, if Enbridge called me up and said, hey, buddy, tomorrow you're paying 4 times, I'm going to question that. I can see how 25% savings came about, because if my bill went up 4 times, yeah, I'm going to turn everything off, and I'm going to walk around in a sweater. Perhaps you can address how the consumers are dealing with those changes.
Okay, I will answer shortly. This really, when we discussed in the government and within the regulator the increase of tariffs, the behavior of consumers was one of the issue we paid a lot of attention. And first of all, we introduced a very, I would say, rich subsidy program. So in order to get the utility bill subsidies, you don't need to go anywhere. Every citizen of Ukraine received by our Ukrainian post office a letter, even with an envelope, with just one piece of paper. And each of the citizens who need this subsidy program, they just filled one piece of paper and post it. And that is all to get the subsidies. And what we've seen that around 4 million of households, as of 13 million, run the subsidy program. This year, with the next increase, we estimate around 7 billion of households who will be running the subsidy program. So for those families which income is really low and they can't afford paying these bills, so all of them are covered with the subsidy program. That's why we increased for 5 billion of hryvnias more our budget for this year to cover with the subsidy program. But that's not the end. We introduced these energy subsidy, energy efficiency loans, where the state covers up to 20% of their bill of all the energy efficiency measures, and local authorities usually cover totally or halfly the interest rate for these loans. And we have already more than 100,000 of these loans being introduced to the citizens. So that's why we are stimulating people not only by covering the subsidies, but moreover just to decreasing the amount of energy. And the third thing is now we concentrate our efforts to covering all of the household by meterings, because when you pay higher prices, you need to have the metering point to understand for what kind of energy you're paying. So nowadays, I would say around 75% of overall consumers are covered, residential consumers are covered by the meterings. but we have a very ambitious goal for 2 years to cover 100% with the meterings. So that's why people will know what amount they consume the energy. We introduce, moreover, this fund of energy efficiency, which will introduce a bigger range of incentives for saving the energy. And we are running a subsidy program for those who really need.
Thank you. There's a question here in the front. While we're waiting for the question to be asked, I just wanted to point out that the individual I referred to, the inverter company, actually Sidhi Loboyko. Why don't you stand up, Sidhi? Sidhi is with the Cave Hill Academy for the Center of Innovation and Development, and they've developed a very smart inverter technology. So that's just a great example of Ukrainian ingenuity.
Thank you for entertainment.
You're welcome. That's why we're here. That's the whole purpose of the forum. So please go ahead.
Good day for everyone. I'm Natalia Katsar-Vuchkovska. I'm a member of Ukrainian Parliament and head of Subcommittee for Sustainable Development. My question is to Mr. Morningstar. So you said that you hate Nord Stream 2. We Ukrainians, we also have very different feelings about this project. As you know, this project is political one, just to spoil Ukrainian gas distribution market, as well as Russia used this tool to bypass Ukraine as political tool. So what will be your suggestion how we could stop this project? Because a lot of EU countries stop advertising it, and Russia is putting a lot of pressure to proceed with this project. What will be your suggestion as an expert, and you know this region very good?
Well, first of all, it's not easy, but I hope it will be stopped. It was interesting when I visited Brussels a couple of months ago. I could find very few people at the European Commission who wanted Nord Stream 2 to happen. Both the Energy Commissioner, Kanieta, and the Vice President, who's overall responsible for energy and other things, Šefčovič, both of them have been fighting hard to keep Nord Stream 2 from happening. The Germans tend to keep saying, well, it's a commercial issue. But what needs to continue to be emphasized is that you can't separate commercial issues excuse me, commercial issues from political issues when you're talking about energy. And that I think the argument continually has to be made that from a political standpoint, how can Nord Stream 2 take place, which would reward Gazprom and reward Russia and be much to the detriment of Ukraine with what's going on with Russia and Ukraine? I mean, all it does, it seems to me, is show a tremendous amount of political weakness towards Russia, and I think would be a very bad mistake. But you can't just argue politics. There has to be a legal basis as well. And there are conflicting legal arguments as to whether the third energy package of the European Union applies or not. I think it does. And I bring back the point that I made with respect to the competition case. And I would make that argument as well. The other thing is that Ukraine has to work with the countries in Europe who are very much opposed to it. Most of the Central and Eastern European countries are very opposed to Nord Stream 2. In fact, 12 of them sent letters to the Commission asking that it not take place. And I think that Ukraine, working with countries that are opposed to Nord Stream 2, can create hopefully enough political influence in Brussels to stop it, or at the least delay it for a long period of time. In the United States, as you can tell from me, I'm not the only person in Washington who talks this way. The President has raised it, the Vice President has raised it, and it's an important part of our agenda. So we just have to keep pushing.
I'm really sorry that I have to cut it off here because the banquet is starting, and I actually had to turn down the president of the Canada-Ukraine Chamber of Commerce because we're out of time. So I apologize. I wish we had more time for discussion. Blame it on the Prime Minister of Canada. But please join me in welcoming all of our distinguished speakers and thanking them.